Next, let's talk about sheet layers. Sheet layers and viewports allow us to depict the design several different ways to convey different information. For instance, in this file I have sheet layers for both the base map and for the hardscape plan. And if you'll notice here at the bottom of the screen, these are two existing trees on the neighbor's property, and then this is an existing fence line. If I come over here to the hardscape plan, you can see those same trees as well as that same fence line. But you can also see that the hardscape plan has been fleshed out quite a bit more than the base map, which is a pretty simple line drawing. And I've been able to do that by layering on information, by adding some additional design layers to this sheet layer, much in the same way that you would use trace paper and hand drafting. First, let's talk about some things that make sheet layers unique from design layers. First, we don't draft on sheet layers. Most information is brought in through the use of viewports. For instance, right here, my drawing area right here, you can see that that's a viewport. If I come back over here to the base map and click on that area, that's a viewport. In fact, if I select everything on this page, and the keyboard shortcut for that is Control-A, you can see up here in the Object Info palette that there are only 3 objects on this sheet layer, and I can click through them. One is my title block, the other is my viewport, and then I added a rectangle here just to sort of white out the client's name. If I come over here, this one has a few more things on it, so Control-A to select all of them. There are 6. So we're looking at the viewport for the drawing, the title block. I brought in my installation notes through a symbol, and then I've got my whited out area over here. So you can see there's nothing on this sheet layer that has been drafted from this basic tool set. All of the drafting for these 2 sheet layers happened back here on a design layer. The other thing that makes sheet layers unique from design layers is I can only view one sheet layer at a time. I can't simultaneously view or layer this base map sheet layer over this hardscape sheet layer. They're just two separate sheet layers in the file. In order to use sheet layers, we need to learn how to use viewports, because it's the viewport that allows us to take a snapshot from the design layer and display it on the sheet layer. And what's unique about viewports is that when I say it's a snapshot, it's a unique snapshot because as I continue to work on the file and the design layers, it's continually updating the viewport on my sheet layer, so it'll always be current. So let's go back to our design layer and learn how to create a viewport. Before we jump in and we make the viewport, I should mention that sheet layers are created using all the same methods that we use to create a design layer. So the difference is that in the organization dialog box, instead of working under the design layer tab, I'll be working under the sheet layer tabs, but I can click new to create a new one. I can edit, duplicate, and delete just like I could for a design layer. And if I'm over here in the navigation palette, this third tab is for the sheet layer. And you can see up here it says navigation sheet layers, as opposed to when I was clicked on the design layer, it told me I was on the design layer up there in the description. So if I right click and click new, purely by the fact that I have clicked onto the sheet layers for the navigation, it's going to create a new sheet layer for me. So let's go back here to our design layer. And when you're creating a viewport, you need to create a crop for that viewport. And so to do that, you're going to use any of the tools in the basic tool set. Most commonly, that's going to be your rectangular tool. And you will just draw over the area that you want to be included in the viewport. Next, I'm going to come up here to the View menu, and then I'm going to scroll down to Create Viewport. Then this message is telling me that the selected object may be used as the viewport's crop. Do you want to use this object as the crop? And the answer is yes. In fact, you could check this box for always do the selected action. Click yes. And then we're going to get this viewport dialog box. So there are a couple of things that you can play around with and change here. The first one that's important is you want to know what layer that viewport is being placed on. All of these layers up here that have the name in the bracket, those are the sheet layers. The layers down here are design layers. I cannot think of a single reason why you would put a viewport on a design layer, because from an organizational standpoint or a file structure standpoint, they belong on a sheet layer. So you should be picking from up here. And in this example, I am going to place the viewport that we're working with on the base map. So I'll select that one. Next up, you have an option to create a drawing label. This particular style includes a written scale. It's important to include a written scale as well as a graphic scale bar. This allows a print to be checked to see if it was printed to scale correctly. If you don't have a written scale included as part of your title block, then drawing labels are a great way to add one. select Create Drawing Label. If there are multiple viewports on the selected sheet layer, then the next consecutive number will be assigned. That number can be edited here or in the Object Info palette. Always give the drawing label a name. Parentheses drawing title is just a placeholder. Another great reason to include drawing labels is when there are multiple viewports displayed at different scales. This allows the scale of each viewport to be labeled separately. You can also change the scale of your drawing here, and we're going to cover scale more detailed in another video. You can control the detail level of your drawing, and I think that part pertains more to architects than it does to landscape designers. It basically, if we were drawing a window, and a window has like a lot of little components to it, you know, like sash and leaf and whatnot, it's really showing like minute details for things like that. But if we're just using larger hardscapes, the detail level does not change very much. So you can leave that on medium. Then up here under the display settings, you can leave it to top plan view, but you can also play around with some of these other views as you start working in 3D. If we were to use a right isometric right now, it wouldn't really make sense. And then for rendering, top plan views get rendered in wireframe, so you can leave it as that. And everything else looks good. So we're just going to go ahead and click OK. Then the software is going to take us to our sheet layer. You can see that now our active layer is over here under the sheet layer tab. So the placement of that check for the active sheet layer is a little different than when the active layer is a design layer. And I can see up here that what's currently selected in the file is this viewport. So let's kind of move this viewport over to the side. So the reason that I wanted to do these two side by side is so that we can play around with some of the layer options to change what it is that we're viewing on this sheet layer. Because right now, we're essentially viewing the whole entire hardscape plan. So if I want to change it so that I'm only viewing the base map, what I would need to do is select the viewport and then come over here to the Object Info palette. And you have a button right here for layers. If I click on the layers, I can change the visibility of what I can see through the viewport. So in this case, I know that all of the text that I added has to do with the design. It doesn't have to do with the base map. This is going to be the base map upper canopy, so I'll leave that as visible. I'll remove the upper canopy because that's proposed trees. Fences and walls would be proposed. The base sheet is going to be information from the site measure, so I'll leave that there. Furnishings are new. The understory is new. Hardscape is new. The 2D ground plane is new. And so now when I click OK, you can see that they look nearly identical. In fact, the only difference that I can see between the two of them is that the walls of the house have been depicted in the viewport that I just created, and that's because the class for those house walls has been turned off, and we will learn about that in a future video. So the other thing that I would like you to see is, remember when we created the viewport, we created a drawing label? That's what the drawing label looks like. And if you accidentally include a drawing label and you would like to get rid of it, what you can do is right-click on your viewport and then go to Edit Annotations. And if I click off to the side, select that, you can see over here in the Object Info palette that this is a drawing label. I can go ahead, just delete it, then exit, and now I don't have a drawing label on that. Another thing that's nice about working with sheet layers is I can create my hardscape plan starting off of this point, starting from the base map, essentially. So I'm going to just go ahead and delete that viewport that we just made. And I'm going to come over here to the navigation palette. I'm going to right-click on base map and duplicate. And then I will just go ahead and right-click, edit, and I'm going to rename my sheet title. We'll just call it Hardscape Plan 2. And while I'm over here, you're going to want to pay attention to your raster rendering DPI. When you are setting up your sheet layers, the resolution of your print or your PDF, it comes from this particular setting, the raster render DPI right here. And so if we're looking at a top plan view, which is rendered in wireframe, then 72 is fine. When we move on and start working with 3D, you're going to want to work with higher resolution. And so in those cases, you'll change your DPI anywhere between 150 to 300. Now, the higher you go in DPI, the longer it's going to take for you to render. So we'll click OK, and now I have a hardscape plan. So my goal is to make hardscape plan 2 match. It won't match completely because I have a lot of other information on this page, but I'm going to try to make this make our new viewport match our original viewport just by controlling those layers. So let's come back to Hardscape Plan 2. I'll select that viewport, click on Layers in the Object Info palette, and now I can start adding things back in. So the dimension, the text, the upper canopy, the way that it looks on my hardscape plan is it's actually been grayed out. Fences are visible, furnishing is visible, understory is grayed out, hardscape is visible, and I have a 2D ground plane. That's how I got that gradient, that green gradient on mine. And I think we'll go ahead and we'll turn off the base map in-house notes for this one, and we should be good to go. And so you can see just how quickly I was able to put together a second sheet layer by creating a duplicate and then just changing the visibility of the different layers in my file. One caveat about creating my Hardscape Plan 2 as a duplicate based on the base map is I can see that my furnishing layer is not on. I don't have my sofas, my chairs, some of the planters that are in the file. So when that happens, you'll want to come and click through your layers and classes, because when that base map was created originally, it means that there were layers and classes that were added to the file that where the visibility was not turned on for that viewport for the base map. And so to look for those, we would just come over here to the layers. I know that the furnishing should all be located on this furnishing design layer, so that's not the problem. The problem is probably in classes. And so a lot of times furniture that you get from Vectorworks will be classed under this furniture name, and we will cover classes in the future. So I will just go ahead, click on that, and I can see I got some of my furniture back. I got my my fire pit, but there are obviously other classes that need to be turned on. And so one good rule of thumb is just to leave unless you have a very specific reason not to have a class on, go ahead and leave all of the classes on.